Hidden deep among the pines and cedars of British Columbia's interior temperate rainforest lies a unique archaeological site. At a natural narrows of the Slocan River, the forest floor of both riverbanks is dotted with numerous large depressions. Some more than 20 meters across, this is all that remains of a pit house village that was occupied by Indigenous people for over 3,000 years. This village, the Slocan Narrows archaeological site, sits in a valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains contrasted against an endless blue sky. These dome-roofed, below-ground homes were capable of housing a number of people. Pit houses were an ideal solution to living in the harsh climate and severe seasonality of the Kootenays. Attributed to the Snayaks people, who were historically called the Arrow Lakes Indian Band, the village is located in the heart of Snayaks traditional territory. Declared extinct by the Canadian government in 1956, the Snayaks are nevertheless recognized as part of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation in the United States and the Okanagan Nation Alliance in Canada. The Slocan Narrows Archaeological Project is a research team that has been working with the Snayaks community to address fundamental questions about the village's history and how people lived within the Upper Columbia River area over the last 3,100 years. The project has learned about village chronology from radiocarbon dates, identified household activities from sediment analyses, and made 3D models of what these dwellings may have looked like. We have even made connections of possible trade routes and quarry locations from studying the composition of stone tools. Not only can this site tell us much about how humans lived in this particular village, but also about the prehistory and human utilization of the region. One of our first research objectives was to understand the occupational history of the Slocan Narrows Pit House village. The primary way we do this is through archaeological excavation and radiocarbon dating, which determine the relative age of materials and artifacts. We sample the materials we need for radiocarbon dating from burned remains of the pit house support posts and roof beams. Fire hearths are also important areas to collect carbon samples. We record each sample's specific data, such as location and physical context, on the sample's bag and on additional paperwork. Later, we use this record in the lab for organization and analysis. Our current understanding of the site's occupational history is based on samples we have collected and dated from 33 pit houses in the core of the village. We have determined that Slocan Narrows had 4 periods or cycles of occupation over the course of the last 3,100 years. This information helps us form a picture of what the population of the village was like during each time period. Each period of occupation began with a founding house. First, the community would dig a depression, then construct the main support beams. After that, they would add horizontal beams covered with woven mats of grasses and other vegetation. Finally, the structure was covered with earth, and a notched ladder gave access to the home through an entrance in the roof. Period 1, the earliest phase of occupation, began around 3,100 years ago and ended 500 years later. This represents the largest known concentration of people in an interior Pacific Northwest pit house village during that time. The radiocarbon data have revealed a 400 to 500 year period between the first 2 periods of the site, when no new pit houses were built. Periods 2 and 3 were much smaller with fewer houses, but there is still evidence of occupation and of new home building. The final phase of the village, period 4, had the largest number of pit houses to be occupied at the same time, meaning the village's population was likely at its highest then. Here's a representation of all 4 periods of occupation and the relative changes in population at the village that we have estimated from radiocarbon dating and the sizes of houses. Findings like these create even more questions for us about how Indigenous peoples were living at Slocan Narrows. For example, we can compare similarly aged houses to one another, or on the other hand, examine changes through time in houses of different ages. This leads us to the next research goal we have focused on, understanding how households were organized at Slocan Narrows. Because the household is the basic unit of most human societies, looking at how the pit houses of Slocan Narrows were organized can give us more insight into what life was like there. After we excavate, geochemical analysis is an effective approach to interpreting the archaeology of residential dwellings. Daily activities such as cooking or tool-making are often repeated in a certain area, leaving behind chemical signatures that we can detect with certain instruments. These signatures can reveal what human activities occurred in the space and even the spatial organization of a house. At Slocan Narrows, field archaeologists collect hundreds of sediment samples from each pit house. Samples from features and floor surfaces are especially important since these will contain important chemical signatures. Researchers collect these samples with a trowel and place them in sterilized plastic bags. All location details of the sediments are carefully recorded. At the Hamilton Analytic Lab, researchers use specialized instruments to measure various elements in the samples. Each analysis has a specific preparation process and results in a list of elements associated with each area of a house. We use maps of each excavation grid square to see the concentration and distribution of each element in relation to the excavated features on each pit house floor. For example, high levels of phosphorus indicate where general activity areas occurred. High levels of calcium, iron, and potassium tell us where hearths were located. The presence of multiple fire hearths, or even periphery fire hearths with no central hearth, allows us to interpret how the space and activities were divided among family members or between different families. Comparing the floor maps of different sized houses at different time periods can reveal potential social difference between human households, the size of families in individual pit houses, and more. Even wider trends like regional settlement patterns and gender roles can also be identified through looking at house organization. As we collect more data from across the floors of more houses from the village, our knowledge of Slocan Narrows, both on a small and large scale, continues to grow. Advances in three-dimensional modeling and other digital tools also play a large role in interpreting ancient spaces, even when we have very little remains of original structures. At Slocan Narrows, we use 3D digital reconstruction to take geochemical analyses a step farther to help visualize daily life in a pit house. Our researchers utilize 3D modeling software to recreate a Slocan Narrows pit house, both exterior and interior. To do this, we used what we've seen in the archaeological record, combined with ethnographic reports and oral tradition. 3D modeling allows us to imagine what the light conditions were like inside a pit house. Pit houses had a central entrance in the roof that let light in and allowed for smoke ventilation. The only light sources would have been from that entrance and from one or more fire hearths, making for a fairly dark space. A central hearth would have lit some of the interior but not the entire home. The interior light would have varied seasonally and throughout the day. Seeing which areas were darker or lighter in this reconstruction helped us gain another level of understanding about how people lived there. The edges of the pit house were likely darker and more confining, and so more private activities might have taken place there. Consequently, activities needing more light, such as stone tool making or cooking, likely occurred where the light from the hearth and entrance was concentrated. Some pit houses also have evidence of periphery hearths used for specific activities, which help to light other areas. Finally, the Slocan Narrows archaeological project aims to learn how the people of Slocan Narrows operated on a regional scale, such as the extent of their prehistoric movements and connections. Ethnographically, the Upper Columbia was occupied by the Snaixed. Their territory stretched from the northern end of Upper Arrow Lake all the way south to Kettle Falls. Through analyzing the stone materials from Slocan Narrows, we are examining if prehistoric people sourced rock from within that traditional territory or from farther away. In an archaeological excavation, stone tools are recovered from the ground or found in the screen. Screening is the process of sieving excavated sediments to find all artifacts from an excavation unit, including small pieces of stone and bone. Small pieces of stone, called flakes, are the result of producing and resharpening stone tools. Artifacts found at Slocan Narrows are then thoroughly studied in the lab at Hamilton College. Analyzing the geochemical compositions of the stone tools provides a kind of chemical fingerprint that helps us match it to its original raw stone source. Our lab is capable of performing both destructive and non-destructive analyses, meaning the samples are prepared for analysis in different ways. We use non-destructive methods to find chemical fingerprints from an artifact without harming it. Geological non-artifact samples are put through destructive sample preparation, where they are crushed and melted into glass beads, which provide more accurate results. We then analyze the prepared samples and the artifacts using the lab's X-ray fluorescence instrument. Inside, the X-rays excite elements within the stone that then give off unique signals. Those signals correspond to an element on the periodic table, and its strength tells us how abundant it is. These readings are the identifying fingerprint of the stone materials. In many instances, we can then match these fingerprints to known geologic rock formations, thus tracing raw stone materials to their original locations. The movement of stone then becomes a proxy for the movement of people in the past. If the raw material is located within the seasonal boundaries of the traditional territory, it implies that people were likely gathering stone while performing other seasonal activities. If the raw material comes from outside the traditional territory, it is likely that there was trade with other indigenous peoples of the interior Pacific Northwest. The analysis of stone artifacts from Slocan Narrows shows us that there are geological sources used by people within the Snaixed traditional territory, including those that range across the US-Canada border. At the same time, there is also evidence of stone materials coming from other areas in the interior Pacific Northwest, indicating that there were likely trade relationships with other indigenous groups. At the end of every field season, we backfill the excavation blocks and work to return each pit house to its previous state before excavation. When we leave, it appears as if we have never been there. This process protects the integrity of the pit houses and ensures we can continue to learn from them through future excavations. The Slocan Narrows archaeological site has evidence that over a span of 3,000 years, there were people consistently living in this valley. We use both traditional and state-of-the-art archaeological techniques combined with oral histories and ethnographies. This allows interpretations of village occupational history, changes in household organization over time, what it was like to inhabit a pit house, and what potential trade networks were operating across the region. Every year, we learn more about Slocan Narrows, but our work both in the field and in the lab is never over. Continued data collection works towards asking new research questions. We also focus on publishing our research and sharing with the archaeological community and the public. Research is ongoing, and we value the local community and institutions that support the archaeological excavations at the River Narrows.